All right, so let me do a quick intro first before I hand over the session for Mr. William Fielding to take over. As we are aware, communicating research is an important step when you talk about research. Last Friday, in fact, I conducted a session together with Ms. Virginia Balance under our bi-weekly Research Essential series on the topic of producing highly visible and impactful research. So research is key in the life of all academic. As an institution of higher learning, we have to focus in delivering relevance, capacity, and the impact as far as teaching, research, and our service, our community engagement. A good research may not necessarily be impactful, but an impactful research naturally originates from a good research. And to be impactful, you need to ensure the research is visible. As your research becomes visible and impactful, you can contribute beyond the academia, the cultural and societal impact, the policy impact, economic impact, environmental, and even health impact that we see now. So Research Edge played this important role for the faculty, staff, and students of COB previously and UB now to ensure their research are impactful and visible to the wider audience. So without further ado, let me now invite Mr. Fielding to continue the presentation in taking us through this 20 years journey. So Mr. Fielding, you can now share your screen.
Thank you, Dr. Vic. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. And it's a great pleasure and privilege to be able to talk with you this afternoon about 20 years of Research Edge. That's quite a long time ago. So maybe we could have some fun and we could have a poll to see how many people this afternoon were actually at that first Research Edge given by Joan Vanderpool. So Dr. Vic's going to put up a little poll for us to see how many people were at the first Research Edge. And we deliberately put in cannot remember because it is 20 years ago.
It disappeared. Okay.
So we've only got a few people who have, one person claims that they were there 20 years ago, and we can probably guess who that person is. So not very many of you were here. I won't hold that against you. The other question, which might be more interesting, is how many of you, this will be the next question, how many of you have attended one of the recent Research Edges on COVID-19? And everybody can remember that one. There we are. So there we are. So that goes to show that we've got a lot of people who are currently interested in research or particularly interested in COVID-19, but obviously not many of us were, thank you, Dr. Vic, not many of us were around at in 2000 for Dr. Vanderpool's first presentation. So what was her vision of Research Edge? I think one of the reasons why I'm giving this talk is because I was at the research unit when Dr. Vanderpool was the Director of Research and Grants. And so her vision for Research Edge was that it should be a forum that would allow researchers, nationally based researchers, to share their research and thereby promote research in the country. It was a very broad aim. She did not see it as being owned by COB. She saw it as being, COB, if you like, as being the host. because she wanted people from outside of the institution to also participate. And I think Terry Fountain is amongst the audience this afternoon, and he was the second suspect on the scene of the Research Edge crime. He gave the second presentation, if I remember correctly. So it was wide open, and as long as it followed, if you like, the rules of research, that it was a systematic inquiry, those were two of Joan's favorite words, systematic inquiry, then she was very interested in it. At that time, she set the goal of 1 talk per month during the fall and spring semesters. So that worked out at about 7 presentations during the course of the year. And that was quite an ambitious goal in those days, in the context of the fact that in about 2003, there were probably some less than 10 academic publications coming from COB faculty. So we weren't publishing very much in the academic field at that time. And that compares to what's happening in 2019, for example, where we have almost 8 times the number of publications coming from UB. So I hope nobody will say that we don't do research. So let me just try and advance this. So as we started this Research Edge off, everything was up for grabs, everything needed to be debated, and there were a lot of discussions, arguments even, over every element that we now take for granted. So even the name had to be decided upon. The name was a subject of great debate. It couldn't be called Research Forum because that was the name of the then COB research publication. But Joan was very anxious that it should represent, if you like, the cutting edge, the latest, the greatest in research that was going on. So hence this word edge. And so we eventually settled on the term Research Edge, but there was a lot of discussion, shall we say, about that. The second point that has always been contentious has been the time and the day. It's never been a good time. It's never been a good day. But isn't it strange we're still meeting on a Friday? Isn't it strange we're still meeting on a Friday afternoon, 20 years later? And time is supreme, as the poet would tell us. So it does suggest that maybe there is some merit in this Friday afternoon slot, despite all the comments and the criticisms about it over the years. We know we can't please everybody all the time, but we've seemed to have been pleasing enough people, enough at the time, to last 20 years. So here we are on Friday afternoon again. The space has always been a challenge, and particularly in the early years of Research Edge, finding a space that was appropriate. You'll see in these marvelous photographs that Dr. Vic has supplied for this presentation, none of these spaces existed 20 years ago. We take them all for granted now, but they simply didn't exist. The library was an idea. The Franklin Wilson building wasn't even on the drawing board at that time. And Research Edge has moved around. It's spent quite a lot of time in the Chimney Lecture Theatre, which was a shared space. And that probably had an influence as to when the time and the date, because we had to choose a time when it was actually available for us to use. We were even for a short while in a space above the bookshop, which is where the Office of University Relations is now located. And we've been down to Grosvenor Close, and until the RCB auditorium came available, the library auditorium was a favorite spot. So as we can imagine, although this was not a requirement, if you like, the Research Edge has become a space where we tell our Bahamian story. It was never a requirement that the research presented should be about the Bahamas or on the Bahamas. And we have had a number of presentations that would fit into that category. But it obviously became a natural space where we would tell each other about the research that was taking place. And when we talk about story, of course, it's our story in a research setting rather than our story in any other way that we might consider it. So the other thing that we need to remember with a lot of these presentations that have occurred over the years is that they cut across many issues. They weren't simply a health issue. They weren't simply a education issue. They usually overlapped with many other aspects. And so three that I would like to demonstrate, or I think the top two in particular, the one that given in 2005 is quite interesting because it was clearly a plea for help in this public policy initiative of the National Health Insurance. They essentially were looking for help in terms, they knew that what they were doing needed to be influenced by data, by research. And I think that that's, when we talk about data-driven planning and when we talk about public policy, this paper from 2005 is really quite interesting. If we fast forward a little bit to the research of our good friend Danny Davis, when he looked at what I would call the Great Fire, that's an even more interesting piece of research because he pulled out really just one element of it. He pulled out the air quality aspect of it. But when we think of the implications of what that event triggered, if you like, it raises issues of sustainability, of environment, recycling, the social issues of having people living close to a public dump. And if you remember his presentation, we had some people who came to the presentation, and their stories of woe as to how badly they had been affected by the fire was really quite amazing. So that's an interesting piece of research because it took one very important element, but there were also other, we might say, equally important elements, which, as far as I know, did not get looked at. And of course, we've had various people have contributed to the COVID crisis in terms of presentations. As you just saw from the poll, quite a number of you have come to at least one of the presentations at Research Edge relating to the pandemic. And these three items that I mentioned here clearly have public policy implications. And so just recently, we actually had a presentation from the Public Policy Institute, which Dr. Smith talked about. And so you can see that the university is clearly is certainly completing the circle, if you like, by trying to make sure that a lot of the research that we have will be impactful in the area of public policy. We've also had a number of what might be termed visionary presentations. I put that in inverted commas because you might not necessarily agree with me. But Terry Fountain, whom I think is here this afternoon, he gave a talk in 2001. And I give the date there, Terry, just to make sure you feel old. And this was concerning accessing and using secondary data for research in the Bahamas. And this was a call for a repository of data from research projects in the Bahamas. And that call still does not seem to have been answered yet. So we still have some way to go with that. So I think that we could say that there's that talk he could give today, and we would still agree with its need. But for some reason, we haven't yet got there. Another talk given by Pandora Johnson, one of our co-presenters this afternoon, co-authors, was on the conduct of research in the Bahamas. As you remember, there's been a constant lament about the unorderly way in which research permits have been issued in the past for people to come and do research in the Bahamas, particularly as it relates to the natural resources of the country. And that was a paper that was very visionary in trying to put that into a more orderly way. And of course, more recently now, I believe there's in fact a bill that's making its way towards Parliament that will start to try and regularize that. But this goes, that you could argue, this piece of legislation has been, if you like, been on the books, on the research books at least, for some considerable time, at least as far as Research Edge is concerned. And then, of course, we have this rather almost entertaining paper now from Maria Oriaki from 2011, enhancing access through online learning. And of course, in 2011, I'm sure most of us would have agreed that's not what a real university does. Online learning, shocking, horror. We can't possibly do that. Well, sometimes we end up doing what we don't expect. But I think these three presentations demonstrate the speed, the varying speed with which change has occurred or is occurring. And I think that that's something that we need to bear in mind. So we can chuckle at some of these maybe, and some of these we may wish that we had worked a little bit faster. Of course, faculty and other people aren't the only people who do research. Students obviously do research, and remember, in the days of COB, student research was not given the same emphasis as it is today. But as far back as 2004, we had our first presentation given by students. Again, what we may take as common and acceptable today caused a lot of debate at the time. Would it be appropriate? Would it be good enough? What about the quality? And so there was a lot of debate as to whether students should actually have access to Research Edge. It may all sound terribly quaint to us today, but these were some of the, if you like, growing pains, or we can look at it as the flexibility and her colleagues when it came to weighing up the pros and cons of these different arguments, which were all novel and had to be solved as they presented themselves to each other. So 10 years ago, we did have a birthday cake. You'll see in the bottom right-hand corner, we have Joan with the then president, Dr. Erda Kerry Baines, cutting the 10th anniversary research cake. And the person who gave the presentation on that day was Dr. Daphne Grace, who had won the Wilson Award, I think for that year or the year before. And I think her presentation itself was of interest because it talks about slavery in a slightly different way to how we commonly think about it. And so, again, it was a research paper that perhaps made us think slightly differently about a topic which we may feel that we are familiar with in some respect. And so it was very nice. Joan at that time in 2010 was no longer in charge of the research unit, but it was very nice to have the opportunity to invite her back and be part of the celebration. So it would be nice to have the cake and Joan with us today, but we will make do with what we have. When we look at more recent topics that have come through Research Edge, we can see that there have been a number of what I would call reoccurring topics focusing on education, health, migration, particularly issues relating to the Haitian population within the Bahamas. And there have been quite a number of talks regarding violence, as we would imagine. So those have happened at fairly regular intervals, if you like, and as I say, they would be, I think we could say that they had been reoccurring topics that we had. And then the slightly more novel ones, obviously we have impacts of COVID, which by definition is novel. It's a novel coronavirus. But I think there's a bigger emphasis now on creativity, and we're seeing some more what might be called broadly technology based Research Edge. And I think the creativity issue is something that we should not overlook. We shouldn't think of research simply as doing a survey or doing an experiment or in those narrow terms. When we think of research, I think it's important to keep in mind that wider issue of creativity, because research itself is creative and there are many different forms of research within the different areas. So I put up a pie chart, partly to deliberately annoy some of my colleagues who dislike pie charts, but I think you can see where the emphasis, broadly speaking, has been over the years on the social sciences and education. So this is simply the number of presentations that we were able to classify. These classifications you can take with a pinch of salt to some extent, because as I said, you will get a presentation to do with tourism that you could say, well, there's some environment, there's some sustainability in that. So these classifications try to focus that theme, that presentation where it most, so if you like, obviously fits, but it's definitely fuzzy at the edges. But I think going back to the comments that Dr. Smith made at the beginning, you can see that looking at sustainability and the environment has been a fairly common thread in Research Edge. It's certainly not been something that's been ignored, and it's something that hopefully these new initiatives will be able to build upon. Where we feel that, where we might feel that the areas that have been lacking possibly have been in the business of, in the areas of business and maybe tourism. And I simply highlight those because, of course, they are regarded as being two of our important pillars of the economy, or at least they were. And so we might feel that those are areas where perhaps going forward we should be doing more research possibly. And of course, post-COVID, well, if we ever get post-COVID, presumably there will be more need for research on the economy and health issues, and I think that those may be two areas where we might expect more research to be occurring in the future. But to give you some ideas to the dynamics of Research Edge, I've given you a graph here, just pulling out three: tourism, and the environment, and business. And I'm very wicked here, but I'm sure you're used to reading cumulative graphs now. We've seen the cumulative number of COVID cases for too long, presented by the Ministry of Health. So I've given you an equivalent picture here, and so you can see that there have been periods where apparently, where really there was not very much was done on tourism, but you can see that in recent years more presentations have been given on tourism. But the environment, yes, there have been some the odd year where apparently not much was presented, but you can see that that has been, if you like, a constant thread through the presentations right from the beginning, right from 2001. And again, you notice the business. Sorry, the business is there, but considering its importance, should there be more? We can always ask. We should remember that Research Edge is not the only thread, if you like, in research at COB or the university. And a number of Research Edge presentations have been published in the International Journal of Bahamian Studies and its predecessors, as well as other journals. And I'd just like to give an example of Christine Gangelhoff's work on Caribbean art music. I think that this is a good example of research which is creative, so there would be no surveys, there would be no experiments in this, but it was a piece of research that was funded by the college, was presented at Research Edge. There were two special editions of the research done by her and her team in the International Journal of Bahamian Studies. It won the Wilson Award for Excellence in Research, and in this year a textbook was published, which of course will obviously feed back into the curriculum of the university. So I think that this is a very good example of where the different opportunities of threads of research have been used to extend our knowledge, in this case of Caribbean art music, and then using that knowledge to create a textbook, which can of course be used to increase the knowledge of the students. So I think this is a very good case study of what some people might say is not traditional research or see it necessarily as being traditional research, but it is a contribution to the body of literature. And so therefore it meets the requirement as to what a piece of research is. If we're honest, of course, research always has challenges. And if we think back to the history of COB, I think we would be correct in saying that research has played second fiddle to teaching for some considerable time. And at various times, research has been put under academic affairs, which of course has made it very clearly something that, if you like, is a part of teaching or just another thing that teachers do, rather than something that perhaps defines the work of a teacher. So there have been ups and downs in the administrative support, if you like, for research. And that understandably has had an influence on, if you like, the research culture, where we're coming from what was a teacher's training college. Obviously, teaching was important. One of the defining differences between a college and a university, of course, is its focus on research. And so that lack of a culture has impacted people's enthusiasm to present and to some extent to attend. And some of us might remember coming to some research edges, and I remember one in 2003, for example, which was a very important paper on mammography, and it was attended maybe by 5 or 6 people. And so that has been a deterrent on occasions to people wanting to present. But I think we probably got over that hump, as you will see in the slides which I'm about to present. So if we look at the number of presentations, obviously the number of presentations for 2020 is incomplete. The dotted line represents Joan's original target of 7 per year. And you will see how successful Research Edge has been in meeting that target over the years. So obviously in 2000, when it started, we only had the one presentation, which was Joan's. And then as the administrative support fluctuated, you will see that tends to be reflected in the number of presentations that have been taking place. And you will see that obviously since 2016, when the college became a university, I think 2 important things you can see: not only has the number of presentations gone up, but they have remained up. And so I think that that's a very heartening observation that we can make. If we look at the sort of composition of who came to Research Edge, in the early 2000s, we had a lot of what we might call the general public attending and relatively few students. This was partly due, and this story sounds terribly quaint now, this was partly due to the great effort that the members of the research unit put into publicizing the Research Edge. In those days, we used the fax. In those days, we used the mail. In those days, we used telephones. And this was all part of what we did to publicize and the Research Edge. Of course, when email came along, this was a complete unknown. And there was a great debate as to whether an email invitation would be acceptable. Would a permanent secretary be offended if they were to receive an email invitation? And so at one stage we were sending out emails to some people and written invitations to others. So all this sounds terribly quaint, but this was all part of this struggle, if you like, of juggling with the new technology and the new paradigm that's forced upon us. Today, of course, we've got a mix of internal and external participants, which we can see by just looking at the people who are attending today. And of course, we've moved from the physical attendance to the so-called live streaming, something I do not understand what a live stream is. I don't understand it. But anyway, that's what we call it, whether we understand it or not. Of course, that's got its ups and downs too, because of course, when we live stream, we can be doing other things. And I I'd love to have a poll now to say, ask how many of you are doing something else, but I shan't. I know. No. So since spring of 2020, we've had to go remote because of circumstances beyond our control. So if we look at the current health of Research Edge in terms of attendance, we see in the early 2000s, the columns in green, we were probably under 20, 25, under 25. And then from spring and fall of 2019, you can see that it is on the up. But then when we get to this live streaming, we see that there is apparently a large number of people attending. Whether we have a large number of people who are listening, we don't know, but we can say attendance figures are up. I just hope the reception is also up. So the impact of Research Edge, obviously, as Dr. Vic said right at the beginning, is to facilitate data-driven planning. And that's all that occasions such as Research Edge can do. It can facilitate, it can't cause it. We've seen in the COVID Edge crisis the number of people who have talked about following the science. The science is telling us what to do. Does it really, or does it not? Because there are decision makers beyond the scientists who have the final say. But what we can do, I think what Research Edge has been very good at, is turning data into information which people can better understand and to comprehend. And it's made a very important difference, I think, in trying to make people recognize that knowledge is in fact our friend. We don't need to be afraid of knowing things. People seem to still be somewhat reluctant to know things because they sometimes feel that that knowledge might be used against them in some way or other. And it does go a long way, not in the way that Terry would like, but it goes a long way in making research findings accessible to a wider audience. Like all organizations, if you like any institution, Research Edge has to be revitalized from time to time. And I think it's very clear to every observer that the appointment of a dean of graduate programs and graduate studies research, that clearly has been beneficial to Research Edge, as you saw from the figures. And innovations such as the working paper series, which have been instituted, have helped to give the Research Edge a longer lifespan, if you like, because a presentation is fine, but when we finish the presentation, we all go home and we may forget what the presentation was about. And so these extended abstracts, which Dr. Vic has initiated, gives a longer life to that presentation, and leaves, if you like, a paper trail, so that people who come after us will have the opportunity of getting an idea as to what the research was about. And of course, the use of technology clearly facilitates collaboration. And we saw some international presentations just last month or so, when we had some speakers from overseas who were able to zoom in and make their presentation. So already the whole direction, if you like, or world view of Research Edge is beginning to change as a result of having to use this live streaming. So looking forward to 2040, if we're still alive, it would all be nice to come back and have another piece of cake, perhaps face to face. I think looking forward, we can expect what we might call more university research, because it will be propelled more and more, we would like to imagine, by people who are undertaking research within the university umbrella. And this will obviously not only be faculty research, but graduate, the graduate students, those from our graduate programs, they should be providing a constant stream of research projects which will be able to, they'll be able to make presentations at Research Edge. So I think that the whole character of Research Edge we can expect to change as we look forward. And that will give us, and I think with the use of technology, we can get a wider pool of presenters who would want to present at Research Edge to address, if you like, a Bahamian audience. But of course, the audience for Research Edge no longer needs to be, if you like, Bahamian, because you can zoom in to the live stream from anywhere. I think that we will also probably expect to have more problem-driven research. The dump at the fire is obviously a problem, and it needs research to try and solve it. And COVID is another problem, which will drive research to try and come up with some. It's also very important, and lurking behind all of this, of course, is that Research Edge should continue to be a manifestation of our creativity and academic freedom, because that's, again, one of the underpinnings of a university. But ultimately, I think if Research Edge can remain or enhance its ability to be the showcase of the nation's most influential research, and again, I use research in its broadest sense, I think that that will be a goal that Joan would have approved of, even though she might not have ever have anticipated that Research Edge would be able to reach such a large audience, not only now within the Bahamas, but also beyond the Bahamas. So with that rather rapid overview, I will come to an end and hand it back to you, Dr. Vic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fielding, for doing a great job in giving us a quick run through of where we are 20 years ago and where we are today. So it's really an interesting journey, and this certainly needs to be published. We need to put this in record so that we can relook into this 20 years down the road when we reach 2040. So now before we go into our toasting, can I open the floor for questions or remarks or feedback from anybody? Feel free to raise your hand. I can unmute you to ask a question, or you can actually post anything in the chat box, and we can ask the question. Anybody wants to ask a question? Okay, Danny Davis. All right, Danny, I've unmuted. You can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fielding. That was nice. I enjoyed that. I have a question with that slide where you had the circle and a lot of colors in the circle. One of them was listed as 4% for research, and even in the comment there was a bit of an exchange around what's in there. Recognizing all the other ones for subject areas, I do want to ask the question: what does that 4% represent?
I'm so glad you enjoyed that unmentionable diagram, Dr. Davis.
We shall not call it by name.
No, of course not. No. That wouldn't be the done thing. We'll call it the birthday cake. The research, there were a number of presentations that were on research. In fact, Joan's very first presentation was talking about research in South Korea, what their research model was for enhancing research within the country. So these weren't presentations about a piece of research. These were presentations that were relevant to research. And I think Virginia Balance gave one about the availability of databases that, or not only databases, but also questionnaires, and other aspects, other facilities that we had, if you like, to help people do their research. So we've had a number of presentations that probably now would be taken over by the other fora that Dr. Vic was talking about, his research series. But these were presentations that really were designed to encourage people or show what was available to help people do their research.
Okay.
So you might regard them as a research methods presentation rather than a research presentation.
Okay, I understand. I understand. Thank you very much.
All right. Let me see if there's any more question in the chat.
I'm sure Terry will have something if he's still here.
To Mr. Witch, I have a question on how to access Dr. PJ's Pandora Johnson's paper that when she first presented on the research strategy. Is that paper still accessible?
Well, if Dr. PJ is here, I hope she'd be able to answer that.
Dr. PJ, you're here. Do you still have access to that research paper that you presented many years ago?
I am, and we can certainly make. Is it Terry who's asking?
Mr. Witch.
Oh, Mr. Veach, we can make it available. We can certainly have it available more broadly.
All right, certainly. Thank you so much. Terrence Fountain, I'm unmuting you. You can speak.
Good afternoon, everyone. And it was certainly a pleasure to participate in this today. Thanks, William. As I said in the chat, I thought it was a great presentation. You actually really captured the first 20 years of the Research Edge Forum. Yes, I was the person who definitely was at the first one when Joan presented the concept of the Research Edge Forum, and it's certainly grown from then to now. I was chatting on the internet with William yesterday about my presentation, and the challenge to the College of the Bahamas at the time was for the establishment of a data bank. It's something I was exposed to while at a meeting years ago. I think it was at UE somewhere, and the students from the various islands were able to access actual real data from their home countries when they were doing research in school. And I thought it would have been an excellent idea for us to get more use out of a lot of the research that actually takes place in this country. Generally speaking, we do research, we write a report, and nothing ever happens with the data after that initial report. It really isn't serving anyone with respect to turning the data into information and being used for practical purposes. And so that was the challenge back then, and William mentioned it in his presentation that we still need to get the information emanating from our research out more widely disseminated. And so how can we do that? We can still create a data bank. There are too many students doing research as a part of their classes where they go out and they collect a small sample, and then they try to come up with conclusions and recommendations based on this limited sample, when in actual fact, we can actually have access to real representative data through these data banks. And so I think I would still throw the challenge out to now UB to think about something like that. Not easy, but it's certainly doable. So it's great to be here. Thanks, William. Great presentation.
Thank you so much. We have a question from Ms. Balance. Virginia Balance. You can unmute yourself.
Okay. Hello.
Okay, I hear you.
Okay. My presentation followed on Terry's, where he spoke about the need to use data that was already collected. But also, my idea was that they should not be creating these questionnaires that didn't really collect very good data. And nowadays, we gave a presentation, what, 2-3 weeks ago, a month ago, I guess, AVIC, on research data management, which is where when you complete your study, you must deposit the data that you collected for others to access, to verify your results, and also to reuse that data to create more knowledge from the data that was already collected. Okay, I've done speaking.
Thank you, Ms. Balance. Mr. Witch.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Beck, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Fielding and yourself for this presentation. Dr. Joan Vanderpool is a person that I worked with many years ago before she actually became Dr. Vanderpool, and she was very passionate about research, and she was one of the persons that spoke highly of the need for the research work to be done. And so, you know, I think it's fitting to be doing this 20 years after the fact. But one of the things that strike me is that the lack of access to papers, reports that are done in the Bahamas, and the lack of circulation within the country. I mean, I came across something recently in reference to the project we're working on in San Salvador in terms of trying to identify some of the pieces of information that exist elsewhere, only to discover that a lot of people have come into the Bahamas, done photographs, photo books, and various things, but the circulation and the sharing of information, or even the knowledge that those documents exist, is not very, you can't find the stuff. I know the work that's being done to digitize Gerace will go a long way to hopefully sharing information that's 50, 40 years old. But I think that's one of the challenges we have right now. How do we now provide for a means of making these documents available? I mean, we now have open source sources of information, but previously, if you didn't know which journal to go to in sediment petrology, you could not find the documents related to the Bahamas. So I think that's one of the challenges we have to deal with going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wish. I see there's a message here from Ms. Margot Blackwell. I think it's an important message that you put, and can I take the liberty to unmute you so that to allow you to speak, Ms. Blackwell?
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Yeah, no, I was part of that team as well, and that was way back. I think it was when Alfred Sears was the Minister of Education. And I understand in my chat, Dr. Johnson texted me back and said that was the paper that she presented. So I missed that part. So I'm not sure if what she actually presented, but it was a framework that we were asked to design by the Minister of Education because it came after we had actually started the work on Andros, and we recognized the rape and pillage that was happening in our country. And also the vast amounts, when I say vast amounts of research that has already been done. And you know, you've been talking about it for years. All of us have been. And so we designed the framework, which would have allowed the university, then college, to be at the very center of this, and the data set collecting and all these questions that I hear Philip asking as well. You know, he's been a part of those discussions. It needs to come through the university. At one point, we did have access to a grant that was going to start it for Andros. That was going to happen at the Burke and hopefully tie back into a national data set. But the bottom line is we don't know what has been done in our country. Nobody in this panel that we have and nobody in this Zoom knows the vast amount that is available. And also there is one other huge issue, and that is by not coming through the university or some entity that has the capacity to do it, we are being given research of our country that when you go and double check, it's not valid, It's been analyzed without our input, and actually is inaccurate in many, many instances. And yet we're having that research being used by policymakers to make decisions for the country. And it's inaccurate, right down to our myths that we call our myths and mythology, let alone some of the other stuff that we get. Plus, more than we know has been accessed and being used by other people for making money. This Aragonite conversation going on in our country, you should see the amount of research and how far back that goes, and the value of it, and the fact that researchers have become very, I guess, to label, if there's a label we could all put our head around, are the new colonialists in our country. And, you know, UB has a responsibility. I've been preaching it for a while. I know Pandora has been. I know several others. And it's time for us to get really serious. And so, Philip, you know, what you doing, man? You need to get on it. So that's my 2 cents. What is UB doing with it? Why do we not have the framework here? Why is it still allowed that BNT can give permits, that the agriculture can give permits, that foreign affairs can give permits? Everybody can give permits when it's, you know, no one's coordinating it. I mean, how is it possible in 2020 when this was written 2 decades ago?
Thank you, Ms. Blackwell. I think the
That's
whole
3 cents.
the whole issue of access, benefit, and sharing. In fact, it's a hot news that is in discussion currently with the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection, who is going to be introducing a new act soon. And in fact, UB have been very involved in this whole discussion, because the whole permitting of research is now going to be handled by the central body, which is the Department of Environmental Planning and Protection. And we are currently led by Mr. Wish and the team, the ABS team from UBS, with Dr. Johnson and Ms. Ruby Nortes. We are all involved, part and parcel of this team currently, to have a better way of actually managing research, better way of controlling what's happening. And I think as a national university, we have an important role to play, and it's the only national university that we have over here. So I think the way how the university is going to be very much involved is very critical, and we are quite aware of this issue. And there is a lot of discussion that is currently taking place currently under the help of Mr. Wich. Yes, Ms. Blackwell, I've unmuted you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. I hear that. And I was most disappointed when I saw some of the legislation coming for the BEST Commission, basically, because it is not an independent institution. It does not allow, it has the ability to be controlled by others. And what we're talking about is knowledge.
Yeah.
Knowledge and access to knowledge, and access to salient knowledge that can be critiqued and valued and shared and used.
Yes.
When it goes to BEST, it's like everything else. It has the potential of being, and so I could not believe when I saw that go to Parliament and being enacted like that. There's one institution in this country that should have access and not necessarily control, because if you look at the framework, it brings all of the stakeholders in. That was what was so wonderful about one of the ways that Joan worked, is she insisted that all stakeholders, whether she agreed with them or not, were heard and had access to decision making. But, you know, to put a data set through BEST, to put everything through BEST, yes, should they be involved? Maybe they should chair the committee, but where should the committee be? Look at the framework. Who knows?
Thank you so much.
Sorry about that. It's a little passion there.
President Smith, maybe you want to respond to that?
Do what?
No, I'm just trying to hand over to President Smith on on his input, because he was very much involved in the discussion as well with the current DEPP, which has taken over the role of Best Commission. Best Commission have been disbanded, and DEPP have taken over that role now.
Okay.
And Dr. Vic, you caused me to say things I shouldn't say. And but I want to reiterate what Ms. Blackwell just said in terms of protecting the right to do research, the right to produce new knowledge. Mike, the other day when we had the meeting about the Access Benefit Sharing Project, first of all, I was very disappointed that the university was not more involved in terms of being consulted. But I pointed out that threatening the academic freedom of any university by proposing even control over its research is a very, very dangerous thing. And that kind of behavior will take us out of the global higher education community in a huge way. But in addition to that, one of the tenets, one of the main jobs of the Board of Trustees is to protect the institution from any outside influence. And so, this thing goes very, very deep. And I think that we are going to continue to discuss this moving forward. We had a meeting this morning with the Gerace Research Center, and the same thing came up again this morning. And I agree with Ms. Blackwell. We have to defend the right of researchers to do their research. Granted, I understand the concerns about international persons coming into the country, and I believe very strongly that yes, they should be controlled, and we should have access to the resources. And we meaning the Bahamian people. But as I said this morning in the Gerace Research Center meeting, you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We all know that the University of Miami does about $55 million a year worth of research throughout the Bahamas. And there's a need to be able to monitor what's going on. There's a need to be able to monitor our vital resources that are being taken out of the country. But what we need to do, in my opinion, is to bolster the research capacity of the University of the Bahamas, our national university, so that these kinds of things remain in our country or go through the university itself for the benefit of the country. So, thank you, Dr. Vic, for giving me the opportunity to say that.
Thank you, President Smith. Thank you so much, everyone, for the discussion and interesting presentation today. So I know we have passed the time, so I would like to conclude the discussion today. Remember, all the session has been recorded. So those of you who have registered to come into the session today, I will send you back the copy if you want to listen or you have missed any part of it, including the presentation slides that we have used today. So now I would like to call upon the President to actually do the toasting today. So please, everyone, I would like to invite all of you to grab your drinks, and do hope you can at least on your video, at least for a brief moment, for us to do this toasting. So can I now invite the President to do the toasting?
I invite everyone to raise their glasses or their cups. Cheers to 20 successful years of Research Edge. May the series continue for many, many, many more years and increase in popularity as the institution, our University of the Bahamas, continues to grow. Here's to you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, President. So that concludes our session for today. Colleagues, students, faculty, staff, and all who have tuned in today. Thank you for taking your time today afternoon to be here for this landmark event for the university. We look forward for your continued support in all our forthcoming Research Edge session. Today's session will also conclude the fall 2020 Research Edge session. Until we meet again in the spring 2021 session, do take care, stay safe, and have a great Christmas and New Year celebration. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Vic. Thank you.